Look, in Italy, power is borrowed. Loyalty is earned. Family is forever. But when loyalty is betrayed, even heaven cannot stop the reckoning. The bells of San Michele Cathedral echoed across the sleepy Sicilian town as Father Alessandro walked slowly through the ancient stone courtyard, his weathered hands wrapped around a worn wooden rosary. To the villagers, he was nothing more than a humble priest, a quiet man who fed the hungry, buried the forgotten, and never spoke of his past. No one questioned the scar that stretched beneath his collar. No one wondered why. Despite being nearly 60, he moved with the balance and awareness of a trained assassin. And no one noticed that every year, on the same rainy November morning, he disappeared for exactly 1 hour. This year was different. A black armored Maserati Quattroporte rolled to a stop outside the cathedral gates. Its polished body reflected the rain like black glass. 3 men stepped out. Each wore tailored charcoal suits, leather gloves, and expressions carved from stone. The oldest approached the church doors, carrying a single silver box. When Father Alessandro emerged, the man's knees struck the wet pavement. He bowed his head. Don Alessandro de Luca. The priest's expression never changed. "You have mistaken me for someone else, my son." The man's voice trembled. "We searched for your body for 15 years. Silence. The families declared you dead." Still, the priest said nothing. The Romano family controls Palermo. The Moretti family owns Naples. The Bellini syndicate has taken Rome. The Cani bought half the government. He slowly opened the silver box. Inside rested an old signet ring engraved with the unmistakable crest of the Luca family, a crowned eagle gripping a sword and olive branch, the symbol every mafia family in Italy had once feared. The priest stared at it. His hand shook, for the first time in 15 years. "You shouldn't have brought that here. They're hunting every surviving De Luca. I know. They'll kill you. I know. They'll kill everyone who helps you." Father Alessandro closed the box and looked toward the towering cross above the cathedral. "I buried Don Alessandro De Luca 15 years ago." The messenger lowered his voice. "No, Don." His eyes filled with tears. "You buried your name." Before another word could be spoken, a deafening explosion shattered the morning. The cathedral windows burst inward. Stone rained from the bell tower. Villagers screamed. Children ran. The black Maserati erupted into flames. Masked gunmen emerged from 3 black SUVs, automatic rifles already raised. Bullets tore through the courtyard. The messenger pushed the priest behind a marble fountain before collapsing, crimson spreading across his white shirt. "Run," he whispered. Father Alessandro knelt beside him. For a heartbeat, he looked exactly like the compassionate priest the town had known for 15 years. Then something changed. His shoulders straightened. His breathing slowed. His eyes became cold, ancient, calculating. One attacker charged through the smoke. Before anyone understood what happened, the priest stepped forward. A single movement. He seized a rifle, twisted the man's wrist until it snapped, struck his throat with the edge of his palm, and sent him crashing into the fountain. The courtyard fell silent. Even the remaining gunmen hesitated. Their leader stared in disbelief. "No." He recognized the technique. Only one man in Italy had ever fought like that. The man every crime family believed had died in a warehouse fire 15 years earlier. His radio crackled. His terrified voice barely escaped his lips. Tell the bosses." Father Alessandro slowly picked up the fallen signet ring. He slid it onto his finger for the first time in 15 years. Rain washed over the eagle crest. He looked directly at the gunman. His voice was calm, almost gentle. "You should let a priest die in peace." Then he took one deliberate step forward. "Now, you have awakened the last De Luca. ACT-1, the night the De Luca Empire burned." The rain had not stopped. It poured over the cracked stones of the cathedral courtyard, washing away blood as villagers fled in terror. Sirens echoed in the distance, but Father Alessandro did not move. His eyes remained fixed on the burning Maserati. 15 years. For 15 years, he had prayed for peace. For 15 years, he had buried the man the world once feared. And in less than 5 minutes, the past had found him. He bent beside the dying messenger. The young man struggled to breathe. They know you're alive. I can see that. They've already informed the commission. Father Alessandro's expression hardened. The commission, a secret council made up of the most powerful mafia families in Italy. Years ago, the De Luca family had led that council, not through fear alone, but through respect. Under Don Alessandro De Luca, unnecessary bloodshed was forbidden. Drug trafficking near schools was punished without mercy. Innocent families were never to be touched. Many called him ruthless. Others call him honorable. His enemies called him dangerous because he believed power without discipline destroyed everything it touched. That belief made him enemies inside his own world. The messenger reached into his coat with trembling fingers and handed over a folded photograph stained with blood. There is one survivor. Father Alessandro unfolded it. His heartbeat stopped. The photograph showed a young man in his early 20s standing outside a university in Florence. He was smiling, unaware that someone had secretly taken the picture. On the back, only 4 words were written. His name isn't Marco. Father Alessandro stared at the face, the eyes, the jawline, the unmistakable resemblance. Impossible. 15 years ago, he had watched flames consume the estate where his wife, Sophia, and their 6-year-old son, Matteo, had been trapped. He searched for them until the roof collapsed. No bodies were ever recovered. His enemies had made sure he believed there was nothing left to save. His fingers tightened around the photograph. Who gave you this? The messenger smiled weakly. Luca, before Father Alessandro could ask another question, the young man's hand fell lifelessly to the ground. A long silence followed. He gently closed the messenger's eyes. Then he whispered a prayer, not as a mafia boss, as a priest. An hour later, the police flooded the cathedral. Investigators questioned witnesses, photographed shell casings, and searched the wreckage. No one could explain how an elderly priest had survived an ambush carried out by trained killers. Father Alessandro answered every question calmly. I was protecting my parish. Nothing more, nothing less. By sunset, the attack had become national news. But elsewhere in Italy, far from the quiet village, panic was spreading. Deep beneath an abandoned opera house in Palermo, 5 men sat around a circular oak table. No guards, no phones, no windows, only silence. Each chair represented one of Italy's ruling families. Romano, Moretti, Bellini, Conti, and one chair left permanently empty. The chair carved with the eagle of the De Luca family. No one had dared remove it, not out of respect, out of fear. At the head of the table sat Don Vittorio Romano, now regarded as the most powerful mafia leader in Italy. Silver-haired, perfectly dressed, cold-eyed, he placed a blood-stained signet ring onto the table. The De Luca ring, the same ring taken from surveillance footage only an hour earlier. He wore it. No one spoke. A younger capo finally broke the silence. That's impossible. I watched him die. You watched a building burn, Vittorio corrected. There's a difference. Another leader swallowed nervously. If Alessandro is alive, he'll come for all of us. Vittorio's face remained unreadable. No, he'll come for the man who betrayed him first. The room grew still, because every man seated there had been in that room 15 years ago. Every one of them had sworn loyalty to Don Alessandro De Luca. Every one of them had broken that oath before sunrise. Back in the village, night settled over the cathedral. Father Alessandro entered a locked room beneath the church that no villager had ever seen. He lit a single candle. Against the far wall stood a plain wooden chest covered in dust. He stared at it for a long moment, then knelt. His hands hesitated over the old brass lock. I prayed I would never open you again. The lid creaked. Inside lay relics of another life. A tailored black suit, a Beretta pistol wrapped in oilcloth, a silver pocket watch engraved with a De Luca crest, a leather notebook, and a faded family photograph. Sophia, Lil Matteo, himself, taken on a summer afternoon before blood replaced laughter. He picked up the photograph, closed his eyes. For years, he had believed revenge was the only path. Then faith had taught him another way. He had forgiven, or at least he thought he had, until today, until he saw the photograph of the young man, until someone whispered there was a survivor. His hand drifted toward the pistol. It stopped halfway. Instead, he reached for the leather notebook. Inside were names. Every man who had attended the final meeting of the Luca family 15 years earlier. Some names had already been crossed out by time. Others remained. One name stood untouched. Luca Bianchi, the only lieutenant who never betrayed him. The only man who vanished the same night that the Luca Empire fell. The messenger's final word echoed again. Luca? If Luca had sent that photograph, then someone else had survived that night. Father Alessandro closed a notebook and looked toward the crucifix hanging above the chest. His voice was barely audible. I don't know why you brought me back to this road. He paused. But if one innocent life remains because I walked away, then I cannot walk away again. He stood, not as the feared Don Italy once knew, not as the humble priest the village loved, but as a man carrying both identities into the same war. For the first time in 15 years, Don Alessandro de Luca stepped back into the shadows, and somewhere in Florence, a young man who believed he was living an ordinary life had no idea that the blood of the most feared mafia dynasty in Italy flowed through his veins, nor that every powerful family in the country would soon be hunting him. ACT-2, the ghost who never died. The first rays of dawn broke over the Sicilian hills as Father Alessandro celebrated what everyone believed would be his ordinary morning mass. The cathedral was filled with familiar faces. An elderly widow sat in the front pew, clutching her rosary. 3 fishermen prayed quietly before returning to sea. A little girl lit a candle for her sick mother. Father Alessandro looked at each of them with quiet affection. For 15 years, this had been his family. A life built not on fear, but on forgiveness. He finished his sermon with the same words he had spoken every Sunday. Hatred destroys the man who carries it. Forgiveness gives him back his soul. The congregation smiled. None of them knew those words had been spoken by the man who once ruled the most feared mafia empire in Italy. When the final hymn ended, the villagers gathered outside to thank him. Father, will you visit my husband this evening? An elderly woman asked. Of course, Maria. Don't forget my grandson's baptism next week. I won't. A young boy ran up to him, holding a wooden cross. I made this for you. Father Alessandro accepted it with a gentle smile. Thank you, Antonio. The boy hugged him before running back to his mother. For a brief moment, Don Alessandro wished he had never opened that old wooden chest. He wished that the Luca name had stayed buried forever, but destiny had already chosen another path. Late that afternoon, he entered the bishop's office. The elderly bishop looked up from his desk. You've never asked for leave before. Father Alessandro nodded. I need to travel. For how long? I honestly don't know. The bishop studied him carefully. I've known you for 15 years. You arrived with nothing. No family, no past, no questions. He paused. But today, you look like a man saying goodbye. Father Alessandro smiled sadly. Perhaps I am. The bishop reached into a drawer and handed him a small leather Bible. Whatever burden you're carrying, don't let it take away the man you become. Their eyes met. Father Alessandro quietly accepted the gift. I'll try. It was the closest thing to a promise he could make. That evening, a weathered blue train carried him north through the Italian countryside. He wore no priest's collar, only a simple gray coat and dark trousers. The signet ring of the De Luca family rested inside his pocket, not on his finger. Outside the window, vineyards, olive groves, and ancient villages blurred together. Inside the carriage, memories returned without mercy. 15 years earlier, the De Luca estate overlooked the Sicilian coast. It wasn't merely a mansion. It was a fortress, a symbol of generations who had built an empire through discipline, loyalty, and fear. Inside the grand dining hall, Don Alessandro stood before the leaders of his organization. Around the table sat the men he trusted most: Vittorio Romano, Enzo Moretti, Giorgio Bellini, Carlo Cani. And at Alessandro's right hand, Luca Bianchi, his closest friend since childhood, his consigliere, his brother in everything except blood, Alessandro raised a glass. To family, the men echoed the toast. But Luca never lifted his drink. Instead, he stared toward the window. His instincts had always been sharper than anyone else's. Something felt wrong. He leaned closer. Alessandro, there are too many guards missing. Before another word could be spoken, the lights went out. Gunfire exploded from every direction. The first bullets shattered crystal chandeliers. The second wave tore through the dining hall. Chaos erupted. Loyal soldiers rushed to shield their dawn. Traitors opened hidden doors. Explosions rocked the state. Within seconds, the De Luca Empire was tearing itself apart. Luca grabbed Alessandro. This is an ambush. I know. Get Sofia and Matteo. I'll hold them off. Alessandro sprinted toward the family wing. Smoke already filled the corridors. His wife clutched 6-year-old Matteo as flames spread through the staircase. Alessandro, he reached for them. A massive explosion ripped through the ceiling. Stone collapsed between them. He heard Matteo scream. Then, silence. The fire swallowed everything. The train jolted to a stop. Father Alessandro opened his eyes. The nightmare ended, but the pain remained, exactly as it had for 15 years. By nightfall, he arrived in Florence. Unlike Sicily, Florence carried elegance instead of menace. Tourists admired Renaissance architecture. Musicians filled narrow streets with violins. Artists painted beneath golden streetlights. No one noticed a former mafia king walking quietly through the crowd. His destination wasn't a church or a hotel. It was an old watchmaker's shop tucked into a forgotten alley. The faded sign above the door read, Bianchi and Son, EST 1958. He knocked 3 times. No answer. Then twice. Still nothing. Finally, once. The lock clicked. The door opened only a few inches. A shotgun barrel appeared. I told you we're closed. Father Alessandro looked directly into the old man's eyes. You become slower, Luca. The shotgun slipped from trembling hands. The old watchmaker froze. His face turned pale. Tears formed instantly. No, it can't be. He stepped forward, studying every scar, every wrinkle, every line carved by time. Finally, he whispered the name he had refused to speak for 15 years. Alessandro. The 2 old friends embraced without another word. Neither noticed they were crying. Hours later, inside the workshop, hundreds of antique clocks ticked together in perfect rhythm. Luca poured 2 glasses of homemade wine. I prayed this day would come. I prayed it wouldn't, Alessandro replied. Luca smiled sadly. Still trying to be a priest? I'm trying to be a better man. And is it working? Alessandro looked at his hands. Until yesterday, yes. Silence settled between them. Finally, Luca reached beneath a workbench. He pulled out a locked metal case. Inside were dozens of documents. Maps, old photographs, financial records, letters. For 15 years, he had collected every piece of evidence connected to the De Luca betrayal. I never stopped searching. Alessandro slowly turned each page. Every document revealed another layer of deception. Bank transfers, secret alliances, political bribes, foreign accounts. Then he found one file that stopped him cold. Its title read, Operation Phoenix. Inside was a list of names. Every traitor, every payoff, every assassination ordered after the De Luca family's fall. At the very bottom, one line had been underlined 3 times. Target, Matteo De Luca. Status, unknown. Alessandro's hands trembled. They never confirmed his death. Luca nodded, because they never found him. The room fell silent. Luca took a slow breath before speaking. I lied to you 15 years ago. Alessandro looked up. I saw Matteo that night. Time seemed to stop. He escaped through the servant tunnels with Sofia. Alessandro's heart pounded. What happened? I lost him during the attack. I searched for weeks. I found Sofia's body. His voice broke. But Matteo? I never found him. Luca slid another photograph across the table. The same young man from before. He grew up under another name. He doesn't know who he is. He believes his parents died in a car accident. Alessandro stared at the smiling face. His son, alive, somewhere in Florence. He whispered a prayer of gratitude. Then another thought struck him. If we know... So do they? Luca nodded grimly. They've already sent men. Before Alessandro could respond, a faint metallic click echoed from outside the workshop. Luca's expression changed instantly. He extinguished the lantern. Too late. The ticking clock suddenly sounded deafening. Outside, footsteps surrounded the building. Then a voice came through a loudspeaker. Don Alessandro de Luca, we know you're inside. There will be no second disappearance. The hunt had truly begun. ACT-3, Blood Oaths Never Die. The watchmaker's shop fell into complete silence. Only the ticking of hundreds of antique clocks echoed through the darkness. Lucas slowly reached beneath the workbench and pulled out a faded leather bag. Inside were 2 pistols, spare magazines, a folding knife, and a folded city map marked with red circles. Father Alessandro stared at the weapons. He hadn't touched one in 15 years. Luca spoke quietly. I kept hoping I'd never need these. Alessandro didn't answer. Instead, he opened the small leather Bible the bishop had given him only hours earlier. Tucked between its pages was a little wooden cross gifted by young Antonio from a village. He closed his eyes for a moment. Lord, don't let me become the man I used to be. He placed the cross carefully inside his coat. Only then did he pick up one pistol. Not with excitement, with sorrow. Outside, 8 armed men surrounded the building. They wore black tactical clothing with no insignias. Professional, disciplined, mercenaries. Not ordinary mafia soldiers. Their leader, a Scarface veteran named Ricardo, adjusted his earpiece. The old man is inside. And De Luca, alive. There was a pause before the voice on the radio replied. No mistakes. The commission wants proof this time. Ricardo smiled coldly. There won't be a body left doubt. He raised his hand. 3, 2, 1. The front door exploded inward. Gunfire erupted through the workshop. Glass shattered, wood splintered. Ancient clocks crashed from the shelves, their gear scattering across the floor. Ricardo's men stormed inside. The room appeared empty. One mercenary stepped forward. Another checked the staircase. The third reached the back hallway. Nothing. Ricardo frowned. Spread out. Suddenly, the lights came on. Not electric lights. Hundreds of grandfather clocks began chiming at once. The deafening sound echoed through the workshop. The mercenaries instinctively looked upward. That single distraction was enough. Father Alessandro emerged from behind a towering clock. One precise strike. The first attacker collapsed unconscious. A second swung his rifle. Alessandro redirected the barrel, forcing the shot harmlessly into the ceiling before disarming him with astonishing speed. A third charged with a knife. Instead of killing him, Alessandro trapped the blade, twisted the attacker's wrist, and drove him into a display cabinet. Luca watched in disbelief. You still refuse to kill. Alessandro answered without taking his eyes off the attackers. I buried enough sons. Ricardo entered last. Unlike the others, he didn't rush. He studied Alessandro carefully. So, the ghost of Sicily really survived. Alessandro recognized him instantly. You weren't there 15 years ago. Ricardo smiled. No, I was the boy who cleaned Vittorio Romano's cars. Now I command his executions. He slowly drew a custom silver pistol. The old men built their empire by betraying you. My generation intends to keep it. Alessandro sighed. Then you're already poorer than they are. Ricardo laughed. You priests always speak in riddles. No. Alessandro stepped forward. I speak from experience. Ricardo fired. The shot missed by inches as Alessandro moved with astonishing precision. In one fluid motion, he kicked over a heavy workbench. Tools exploded across the room. Mercenaries stumbled. Luca smashed a hanging clock onto another attacker's shoulders. The room descended into chaos. Within seconds, The elite strike team was no longer hunting. They were surviving. Outside, a black limousine stopped at the end of the alley. A young woman stepped out. She wore a tailored navy suit, dark sunglasses, and carried herself with quiet confidence. She ignored the gunfire, ignored the screams, ignored the fleeing pedestrians. Instead, she watched the workshop with calm, calculating eyes. One of her bodyguards approached. "Madam, should we intervene?" She shook her head. "Not yet. What if they kill him?" A faint smile appeared. "They won't. Not today." She looked at the burning workshop. "I've waited 15 years. I can wait 5 more minutes." Inside, Ricardo staggered backward, bleeding from a cut above his eye. Every one of his men had been defeated, some unconscious, others too injured to continue. He couldn't understand it. This was supposed to be an aging priest. Instead, he was fighting a legend. "You could have ruled Italy," Ricardo shouted. "You could have rebuilt everything." Alessandro lowered his weapon. "I no longer want an empire." "Then why come back?" The answer came without hesitation. "I came back for my son." Those words echoed through the shattered workshop. For the first time, Ricardo looked afraid, because if Matteo de Luca truly lived, everything the Commission had built was in danger. Ricardo suddenly smiled. "You'll never find him." Alessandro remained silent. "He isn't the only one we've been watching." Luca's face turned pale. "What are you talking about?" Ricardo laughed despite the blood running down his face. "The Commission doesn't know where Matteo is, but someone else does." He reached into his pocket, pulled out a photograph, dropped it onto the floor. It showed the same young man leaving the university. Standing beside him was a beautiful young woman with long dark hair, smiling as she held his hand. On the back was a handwritten message: "Kill the girl first. The son will follow." Alessandro froze. His heartbeat thundered in his ears. "They're using her." Ricardo grinned. Love always makes people predictable. Before Alessandro could stop him, Ricardo bit down on something hidden inside his mouth, a cyanide capsule. Within seconds, he collapsed, dead. The workshop fell silent. Luca knelt beside the body. Professional, he'd never allow himself to be questioned. Alessandro picked up the photograph with trembling hands. His son wasn't just alive. He was in love. And because of the De Luca blood flowing through his veins, an innocent woman had become the next target. Outside, the mysterious woman in the navy suit watched as Father Alessandro and Luca emerged from the ruined workshop. She removed her sunglasses. Her eyes never left Alessandro. "So, the lioness finally awakened." She turned to her bodyguard. "Prepare the car. It's time the last of Luca learned the truth." The bodyguard hesitated. "Should we tell him who you are?" She looked toward the Florence skyline. "No, not yet. If he discovers my identity too soon, he'll never forgive me." The limousine disappeared into the night. Unaware, Father Alessandro stood in the rain, clutching the photograph of the young couple. He made himself one solemn promise. He had failed his family once. He would not fail them again, even if he had to bring down every mafia family in Italy to protect the son who didn't yet know his father's name. ACT4, the son who never knew his name. The morning sun rose over Florence, painting the Arno River in shades of gold. For the first time in 15 years, Don Alessandro de Luca stood only a few streets away from his son. Yet he could not walk to him, not as a father, not as a mafia don, not until he knew the truth. Luca parked their aging Fiat outside the University of Florence. Students hurried across the courtyard with backpacks slung over their shoulders, laughing, arguing, dreaming about futures untouched by blood or betrayal. Alessandro watched them in silence. "Which one is he studying?" he asked. Luca looked down at the file. "Architecture." Alessandro smiled faintly. Sophia always said he wanted to build things instead of breaking them. A painful silence followed. Then Luca pointed toward the main entrance. There, a young man stepped through the university doors, carrying a roll of blueprints under one arm. He greeted the security guard with a smile. He stopped to help an elderly professor whose books had fallen to the ground. Then he crossed the courtyard toward a nearby cafe. Alessandro's breathing became uneven. The young man had Sophia's smile, his own determined eyes, and the quiet confidence that had defined generations of De Lucas. For 15 years, Alessandro had imagined this moment. He had imagined embracing his son, telling him the truth, asking forgiveness for not saving him. Instead, he remained inside the car, unable to move. Matteo, known to the world as Marco Rossi, sat at an outdoor cafe reviewing architectural sketches. Across the table sat the same young woman from the photograph. Her name was Elena Vitali. She nudged him playfully. "You're thinking about work again." Marco laughed. "I have to impress the judges. The competition is next month." "You already will." She reached across the table and squeezed his hand. "When you're famous, don't forget me." "I couldn't." Watching from across the street, Alessandro felt something he hadn't experienced in years. Hope. His son wasn't consumed by violence. He hadn't become another soldier. He was building a future. The kind of life Alessandro had always wanted for him. Perhaps, he thought, the De Luca name could end with him. Perhaps that was the greatest gift he could give his son. A black motorcycle rolled slowly past the cafe. The rider wore a tinted helmet. No license plate. He glanced once toward Marco, then spoke quietly into a hidden microphone. Target confirmed. Within seconds, 3 more motorcycles entered the square. Luca noticed immediately. His expression darkened. They found him. Alessandro was already opening the car door. "No." Luca grabbed his arm. "If you run to him now, every sniper watching the square will know exactly who he is." Alessandro clenched his jaw. His instincts as a father screamed to protect his son. His instincts as a mafia leader warned him to wait. Seconds felt like hours. The first attack came without warning. A delivery van mounted the curb. Instead of slowing down, it accelerated directly toward the cafe. Marco looked up, confused. Elena screamed. The van crashed through tables and chairs. Students scattered in every direction. Without thinking, Marco shoved Elena clear of the vehicle. The impact threw him across the pavement. Alessandro was already moving, not toward the attackers, toward his son. He reached Marco just as 2 armed men jumped from the van. One raised a suppressed pistol. A single shot rang out. Alessandro stepped between the bullet and his son. The round grazed his shoulder. Pain flashed across his face. He didn't even look at the wound. Instead, he disarmed the first gunman with a movement so fast that witnesses later argued they must have imagined it. The second attacker charged with a knife. Alessandro blocked the strike, twisted the attacker's wrist, and slammed him against the wrecked van. Marco stared in disbelief. The elderly stranger moved with impossible precision, like someone who had spent an entire lifetime surviving. Within moments, the attackers retreated, disappearing into traffic before police sirens reached the square. Marco struggled to his feet. "Sir, are you all right?" Alessandro looked into his son's eyes for the first time in 15 years. He wanted to say everything. "I'm your father. I've searched for you every day. I'm sorry." Instead, he smiled gently. "I'm fine." Marco noticed the blood on Alessandro's shoulder. "You're hurt because of me." It was only a scratch. Elena approached, still shaking. "Thank you. If you hadn't been here..." She couldn't finish the sentence. Marco extended his hand. "My name is Marco." Alessandro looked at it for a long moment before accepting. He almost said Alessandro De Luca. Instead, "My name is Alessandro." Nothing more, nothing less. Before another word could be exchanged, police flooded the square. Witnesses pointed toward Alessandro. "That's him. He saved them." Officers rushed over. One detective stepped forward. Tall, sharp-eyed, calm, he introduced himself. Inspector Johnny Ferraro. He studied Alessandro carefully. "You handled yourself like military." "I was younger once." Ferraro wasn't convinced. "I'll need a statement." Alessandro nodded politely. "Of course." As the detective turned away, his eyes briefly settled on the old scar beneath Alessandro's collar. Something about it felt familiar, very familiar. That evening, inside an abandoned monastery overlooking Florence, the leaders of the commission gathered once more. Don Vittorio Romano slammed a newspaper onto the table. Its headline covered the front page. Unknown hero stops university attack. A photograph showed Alessandro helping Marco to his feet. Every man around the table recognized him instantly. One capo whispered, "He's protecting the boy." Another looked terrified. If Matteo discovers he's at a Luca, the old family will rise again. Vittorio remained silent, then slowly smiled. So, he finally found his son. He turned toward the only person standing in the shadows. A woman, elegant, composed. The same mysterious woman who had watched the battle outside Luca's workshop. "Is everything prepared?" She answered without emotion. "Yes." "Then it's time." Vittorio nodded. "Bring us the boy." "And if Alessandro stands in your way," he paused, "remind him that every ghost can die twice." The woman lowered her gaze. Understood. But as she turned to leave, a flicker of pain crossed her face, one that no one in the room noticed, because she carried a secret capable of destroying every mafia family in Italy, a secret that even Don Alessandro had never imagined. And when that truth came to light, the De Luca legacy would never be the same. ACT 5, the truth buried in the fire. Rain once again blanketed Florence, from the rooftop of an unfinished cathedral restoration project. Don Alessandro watched Marco and Elena leave the police station under escort. Inspector Johnny Ferraro had insisted they remain under protection. He knew this wasn't a random attack. He just didn't know why. Luca climbed the stairs carrying a small envelope. "They're moving." Alessandro turned. "Who?" "The commission. They've abandoned Palermo. They've abandoned Rome. They're gathering at the old De Luca estate." Alessandro's eyes narrowed. "The place they destroyed." Luca nodded. "They're waiting for you." "No." Alessandro looked toward the city. "They're waiting for him." At that very moment, Marco and Elena were driving toward Elena's family home. The streets were unusually quiet, almost too quiet. Marco frowned. "Doesn't this feel strange?" Before Elena could answer, a black truck slammed into the side of their car. Metal screamed. Glass exploded. The vehicle spun twice before crashing into a stone barrier. 3 black SUVs surrounded them. Masked men poured out. Professional. Fast. One smashed the driver's window. Another fired a tranquilizer into Marco's shoulder. Elena fought back, striking one attacker with a tire iron. Another grabbed her from behind. She screamed Marco's name. His vision blurred. The last thing he saw was Elena being dragged into another vehicle. Then darkness consumed him. An hour later, news reached Alessandro. Luca burst into the safe house. "They've taken them." Alessandro closed his eyes. "I was too late." Luca placed a GPS tracker on the table. "They wanted us to find them." "Then it's a trap." "Yes." Alessandro stood. "For 15 years, I ran from this war." He opened the old wooden case one last time. Inside lay the black suit of the De Luca Don. He touched the fabric, not with pride, with grief. Slowly, he put it on, then the signet ring, then the old pocket watch Sophia had given him on their wedding day. Finally, he looked into the cracked mirror. The priest was still there, but so was the man Italy had feared. Don Alessandro De Luca had returned, not to reclaim an empire, to save his family. As Alessandro prepared to leave, the door opened. The mysterious woman walked inside alone. No bodyguards, no weapon drawn. Luca immediately reached for his pistol. She raised both hands. "I'm not your enemy." Alessandro studied her face carefully. "I've seen you before." "I know." "You watched the workshop." "Yes." "You watched the university." "Yes." "Who are you?" The woman took a slow breath, then removed a silver necklace hidden beneath her blouse. Hanging from it was the crest of the De Luca family. Not a copy. The original family emblem. Alessandro froze. Only direct members of the bloodline carried that design. "My name," her voice trembled, "is Isabella. My mother was Lucia De Luca. Alessandro's eyes widened. His younger sister. She had disappeared months before the betrayal. Everyone believed she had been murdered. I watched her die, Alessandro whispered. No. Isabella shook her head. She escaped. She gave birth to me. She spent her life hiding from the commission, and before she died, she told me who I really was. Luca stepped back in disbelief. You mean? I'm Alessandro's niece. Silence filled the room. Isabella looked at her uncle for the first time. I've spent 10 years searching for you. I was the one who sent Luca the photograph. I was the one who kept Marco hidden. Alessandro felt his knees weaken. You protected my son? Yes. But I couldn't protect everyone. She lowered her head. The commission knows the truth now. Alessandro stepped closer. Tell me everything. Isabella nodded. The fire 15 years ago wasn't meant to kill your family. It was meant to erase the De Luca bloodline forever. She unfolded an old document, stamped with the seals of every major mafia family. Across the top were the words, "The Final Pact." Signed beneath were 5 names: Vittorio Romano, Enzo Moretti, Giorgio Bellini, Carlo Cani, and Alessandro's breathing stopped, a 5th signature. One he recognized instantly, his own cousin, Domenico De Luca. Luca cursed under his breath. Domenico? He betrayed his own blood. Isabella nodded. He wanted to become Don. When the others promised him power, he opened the gates that night. Alessandro closed his eyes. The betrayal hadn't come from outside. It had begun within his own family. Just then, a phone on the table rang. Unknown number. Alessandro answered. Vittorio Romano's calm voice filled the room. Good evening, old friend. Where's my son? Safe. For now. And Elena? Also alive. For now. Alessandro remained silent. Vittorio continued. You've been chasing ghosts for 15 years. So let's end it where it began. The De Luca estate. Midnight. Come alone. If I see police, your son dies. The call ended. Luca slammed his fist onto the table. It's suicide. Isabella agreed. They have dozens of men. Alessandro looked toward the rain-soaked city. No, they have something much worse. What? They believe fear still controls me. He reached for the old family ring, then looked at Luca. Gather everyone who still remembers the De Luca oath. There aren't many left. I only need those whose loyalty cannot be bought. He turned to Isabella. Protect Elena. I'll protect Marco. For the first time in 15 years, the eagle of the De Luca family would fly again, not for power, not for revenge, but for family. Far away, at the burned ruins of the De Luca estate, Marco slowly regained consciousness. His hands were tied to a wooden chair. Across the room, Elena was bound beside him, confused and frightened. A man stepped from the shadows, elegant, silver-haired, holding a glass of red wine. Don Vittorio Romano. He smiled warmly. Good evening. He paused deliberately. Matteo De Luca. Marco frowned. My name is Marco Rossi. Vittorio chuckled. No. He leaned closer. That's the biggest lie you've ever been told. Marco's entire world was about to collapse. ACT 6. Family is forever. Lightning split the Sicilian sky as midnight settled over the ruins of the De Luca estate. 15 years earlier, it had been the heart of one of Italy's most powerful families. Now it stood as a blackened skeleton of stone and steel. Burned walls, collapsed balconies, broken statues. Nature had slowly reclaimed what betrayal had destroyed. Yet beneath the ruins, the ancient family chapel remained untouched. It was there that Don Vittorio Romano had chosen to end the De Luca bloodline once and for all. Marco sat bound to a wooden chair, his wrists bleeding from the ropes. Across from him, Elena struggled against her restraints. Neither could understand why they had been brought to this place. Vittorio Romano calmly poured himself another glass of wine. You spent 21 years believing you're Marco Rossi. He smiled, but blood never forgets. Marco shook his head. You're insane. My parents died in a car accident. No. Vittorio walked toward an old portrait hanging on the cracked chapel wall. The portrait showed a younger Alessandro standing beside Sofia, with a little boy between them. Vittorio pointed toward the child. Look closely. Marco's breathing slowed. The little boy had his face. No, this is impossible. It is... Vittorio's smile widened. You are Matteo de Luca, the last legitimate heir of the De Luca family. Marco stared at the portrait in disbelief. His entire life, every memory, every identity had been built upon a lie. Outside the estate, a lone black Alfa Romeo rolled quietly through the iron gates. No headlights, no escort, no army. Only one man stepped out, Don Alessandro de Luca. He wore the same black suit he had last worn 15 years ago. Rain soaked the fabric. The silver De Luca ring rested on his finger. Around his neck, hidden beneath his shirt, hung the small wooden cross given to him by young Antonio from a village. He looked at the ruins before him. I came home. At last. Hidden throughout the estate, more than 40 armed men watched through rifle scopes. One whispered into his radio. Target has arrived. Another laughed. He really came alone. But they were wrong. Very wrong. Far beyond this estate, in the surrounding hills, old headlights began appearing one by one. A vintage Fiat, an aging Lancia, an old Alfa Romeo. Nothing flashy, nothing expensive, just ordinary cars driven by ordinary men. Former De Luca soldiers, retired bodyguards, old friends, men who had disappeared after betrayal but had never broken their oath. They had no uniforms, no family banners, only loyalty. Luca Bianchi stood among them. He smiled. The eagle still flies. Inside the chapel, the giant wooden doors slowly opened. Every eye turned. Alessandro entered alone. His footsteps echoed across the ancient stone floor. Vittorio applauded. I knew you'd come. You always were predictable. Alessandro's gaze never left Marco. For the first time, father and son truly looked at one another. Marco searched the stranger's face, then remembered the man from Florence, the man who had saved his life. You. Alessandro nodded gently. Yes. Vittorio laughed. What a touching reunion. He pressed a pistol against Elena's head. So tell him. Tell the boy who you really are. Silence filled the chapel. Alessandro slowly removed the signet ring from his finger. He walked toward Marco, then knelt before him, not as a don, as a father. His voice trembled. My name is Alessandro de Luca. I am your father. Tears filled Marco's eyes. No. My father died. I know. I believe that too. Alessandro lowered his head. I searched for you until the fire forced me away. I never stopped loving you. I never stopped praying that somehow you were alive. Marco stared at him. Everything inside him wanted to reject the impossible truth, yet something deeper, something impossible to explain, made him believe. Vittorio rolled his eyes. Enough. He raised his pistol. This family reunion ends now. Before he could fire, a gunshot echoed from outside. Then another. Then dozens more. The old De Luca loyalists had begun their assault. Chaos erupted throughout the estate. Explosions shook the walls. The commissioned soldiers rushed toward the entrances. Luca Bianchi burst through a side door, cutting Elena's restraints. Isabella appeared moments later, shielding Marco behind a stone pillar. The battle had begun. Vittorio aimed directly at Alessandro. You should have stayed dead. He fired. Alessandro stepped aside at the last possible second. The bullet shattered a stained glass window. The two aging mafia leaders faced each other one final time. No bodyguards. No armies. Just two men whose choices had shaped 15 years of bloodshed. Vittorio lunged. Alessandro met him head-on. Their struggle was fierce but controlled. Two experienced men who knew every move carried the weight of a lifetime. Vittorio reached for a hidden knife. Alessandro blocked the strike and forced it away. You still hesitate, Vittorio hissed. You always thought mercy made you stronger. Alessandro answered calmly. No, it made me human. With one decisive movement, he disarmed Vittorio and knocked him to the ground. The pistol slid across the chapel floor, stopping at Marco's feet. Father and son looked at each other. Marco picked it up. His hands trembled. Vittorio laughed from the floor. Do it. Kill me. Become what your father truly is. The chapel fell silent. Everyone watched, waiting. Marco looked at the weapon, then at Alessandro. Finally, he lowered the pistol. I won't build my life on another murder. Alessandro smiled through tears. In that moment, he knew Sofia had won. Not him, not the De Luca name. Her dream. Their son had chosen a different path. Police sirens surrounded the estate. Inspector Johnny Ferraro entered with armed officers. The commission's surviving members surrendered. Years of evidence gathered by Luca and Isabella were recovered from hidden vaults beneath the estate. The empire built on betrayal collapsed before sunrise. 3 months later, the De Luca estate looked very different. The weapons were gone. The hidden vaults had been sealed. The old chapel had been restored, not as the headquarters of a mafia empire, but as a memorial to every innocent life lost because of organized crime. Alessandro never reclaimed the throne of the De Luca family. Instead, he donated the family's remaining legitimate wealth to build schools, restore churches, and fund scholarships for children who had lost parents to violence. Marco returned to Florence and completed his architecture degree. His first project was a restoration of the De Luca estate, not as a fortress, but as a cultural and community center open to everyone. Elena stood beside him every step of the way. Luca Bianchi finally retired, spending his days repairing antique clocks instead of hiding from ghosts. And Isabella established a foundation that helped families escape the grip of organized crime, ensuring that the De Luca legacy would be remembered for hope rather than fear. As for Alessandro, he returned to the small Sicilian village where everyone still knew him simply as Father Alessandro. One Sunday morning, little Antonio, the boy who had once given him the wooden cross, ran to greet him after Mass. Father, the boy asked, why do people keep saying you're a hero? Alessandro smiled warmly. I'm not a hero. I'm just a man who was given a second chance. Antonio looked puzzled. A second chance to do what? Alessandro gazed toward the old cathedral bells as they rang across the village. To choose family over power. The boy smiled, satisfied with the answer, and ran off laughing. Alessandro slipped the worn wooden cross back beneath his collar. For years, he had believed the De Luca legacy was built on fear. He now understood the truth. A family's greatest inheritance was never its power. It was the choices passed from one generation to the next. As the bells echoed through the valley, he whispered the words that had guided the De Luca family for generations. Words that finally carried a new meaning. Power is borrowed. Loyalty is earned. Family is forever. And for the first time in 15 years, Don Alessandro De Luca was finally at peace. The end.